It has been a fantasy football season for the books. Champions were crowned, losers were punished. Today, though, we are bringing you our top 10 lessons learned from this crazy 2025 season of fantasy football. Now, how this is going to work is that Ty and I have each brought 5 takeaways apiece. We'll take turns switching off, presenting them, and discussing them. Ty, we'll start at the top with you here. Late round quarterback was an absolute gem once again this year. An old trick continues to work in 2025.
It continues to work, and you could also make the argument that like the early quarterback kind of train of thought kind of busted on us this year. But I prefer to look on the glass half full side of things, where I look at these late round quarterbacks and they just continue to deliver for us. Each of the last 4 years, there have been at least 2 late round quarterbacks that have gone on to finish as top 10 quarterbacks on the year. We go all the way back to 2022. Justin Fields and Geno Smith were outside the top 15 quarterbacks at draft time. They finished quarterback 5 and quarterback 6. 2023, we have Brock Purdy and Jordan Love all outside the top 18 quarterbacks. They finished as a quarterback 5 and quarterback 6. And then you look at Baker Mayfield and Bo Nix and Sam Darnold last year. All of them finished as top 10 quarterbacks. And now this year we set a new record with 4 late round quarterbacks: Caleb Williams, Drake May, Trevor Lawrence, Matthew Stafford, all going at the quarterback 15 or later. And they all finished as top 6 quarterbacks in points per game. The common thread with all of these guys, all the way back to 2022 to now, it's rushing production and or high scoring offenses. So no duh, that's what generates fantasy points for quarterbacks. But as we go into the next year and we start looking at ADPs and all that kind of stuff, that's what we can look for. And that's where a lot of advantages can be won, because a lot of teams may still sink some early capital into some very, very good quarterbacks. Jalen Hurts may be one of them. Patrick Mahomes may be another. Now his injury will definitely kind of
dictate a lot. Yeah,
correct. But all that to be said, don't feel the pressure to go just spend high capital on quarterbacks when they are late round quarterbacks that continue to deliver year in and year out.
We'll talk about another position too later on that I think is it's an interesting dynamic to try and balance when you're drafting your fantasy football teams. I just want to take a quick moment to read all the quarterbacks that went past pick 100. So in your 10-man leagues, we're talking about the 10th round or later. We're looking at Jared Goff, who also turned in a fine season. You're looking at, again, Dak Prescott, Caleb Williams that you named, Brock Purdy, who came on over the back half of the season, back-to-back games at 30-plus points. Justin Herbert. You mentioned Drake May, Trevor Lawrence, Matthew Stafford. Again, so many guys that you could just throw a dart on after pick 100. The Kyler Murrays of the world, just flat out disappointing this year. The Baker Mayfields of the world, flat out disappointing this year. It's either the guys at the top or the late round guys. All the guys that are being drafted in the middle is more of a, well, I guess I need them and they did well last year. To me, I always just find those guys being not outright bad picks, but picks that I don't feel like actually make my fantasy football team better at draft time, unless if I have like a Mike Evans, right? But Mike Evans was even injured throughout the course of this year. So yeah, late round quarterback continues to be one of my favorite strategies. And especially if you play in mass best ball tournaments, you're going to see a lot of teams this year that either outright win the tournaments or were highly placed in the tournaments, either had Josh Allen or a multitude of these late round quarterbacks this year. I want to pivot positions here, Ty. I want to talk about 3rd and 4th year wide receivers because I fell victim to investing heavily into this sophomore class at the wide receiver position. Historically, those have been great bets to make. Like in recent memory, you just think about Justin Jefferson, elite talents, right? Who have had phenomenal second-year breakouts. But we can't forget that wide receivers have a much longer shelf life than running backs, which allows them to have a longer window for their breakout season. You think of guys like Nico Collins just from 2 years ago as a primary example in his 3rd year, breakout year with CJ Stroud. Take a look at the wide receivers in the top 10 from this past year in points per game. Obviously, Puka Nacua was being drafted as a top 10 wide receiver. No duh there. But you got a massive season. With all the question marks around JSN, you got a massive season out of JSN. Rashee Rice, duh. Once he was off the suspension, you knew he was going to be a top 10 guy. But you got George Pickens having a big breakout year. Drake London finally turned it on once he was playing with Michael Penix. He was getting targeted like crazy. Chris Olave was being drafted in the around pick 75 this year. Massive breakout season, top 10 in points per game. If you want to go on pure fantasy points, you can look at Zay Flowers. You can look at Jameson Williams over the back half of the season. These guys have always been good. We know that. So keep taking swings if you know the potential is there. You know the talent is there. You just need the opportunity. You can have longer patience with these players and not just be obsessed with the shiny new toys at the wide receiver position.
I love this one a lot because how often do we write off the second year receivers that don't take the massive jump that we want them to? Just look at this year's sophomore.
This year's sophomore class is perfect example of that.
Perfect example. A lot of people are going to hit panic on them. I like not to spoil my dynasty plan for the offseason. So if you're in my dynasty league, I need you to just shut your ears off. Okay. This is not for you. But I'm going to be buying the dip on these guys because these third and fourth years are the most pivotal, but also the best times for these receivers to kind of get back on track and then continue development and continued growth in their game as well. So you brought up George Pickens, Chris Olave, JSN. Sometimes it's a change of scenery, like we saw for George Pickens. Sometimes it's just a change in play caller for Chris Olave, yes. Right? There's so many different factors that go into this. But at the end of the day, if the opportunity lines up for these third and fourth year receivers, you should be all in on them. Now, all in maybe a little too over the top, but like you get what I'm trying to say is that like, yeah, not to say that second year wide receivers aren't a bad bet, but your third and fourth year receivers usually get a discount at draft time because we've seen them, more than the second year guys. We don't think a breakout is as likely. These third and fourth year receivers this year have kind of proven that to be a poor train of thought.
I mean, you go back and just look at the fourth year wide receiver draft class. That was the Drake Londons, the Chris Olaves. Shoot, Garrett Wilson was PPRing his way to a top 15 season. I believe he was top 15 in points per game as well this year, despite landing on IR over the back half of the season. We all knew the talent was always there for these players. That was a special wide receiver draft class. Sorry to Jahan Dotson, he didn't quite make the cut. But point being, you think about all of the first round wide receivers in that draft class. The talent was so evident. It was just a matter of time before all these players hit. And it just so happens in one season, all of them managed to click in their fourth year, given different changes, different circumstances, right? All these teams that they ended up on were bad. George Pickens found a change of scenery to a much better Dallas Cowboys offense. Things can change over the course of 3 to 4 years. Allow them to develop. Give yourself room to be patient with these players, as again will be a theme we kind of talk about here over the back half of these lessons learned. Ty, I'll kick it right back to you here for lesson number 3, sustained success. We think about the guys who performed really well last season, might have let you down this year, or the other side of the coin of that as well. I'll let you dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, this one's kind of a twofold thing. You kind of hit on the one side of this of the year-to-year success, right? Saquon Barkley is kind of the epitome of this. We were talking about this at draft time. There was no way that he was really going to repeat what we saw last year. I think a lot of people understood that, but they still bought in on this offense is still really good. It may not be the same numbers, but he can still be a top 3 guy at the position kind of thing. Now, to say that we thought that it could be as inconsistent and as bad as it has been this year, I don't think anybody can say that they saw that one coming. But the point is the year-to-year success, especially after kind of record-setting seasons, or at least these, I don't want to call them anomaly seasons, but they're kind of the outlier seasons that we need to be more aware of. The other side of this, though, is just the week-to-week success, right? When we look at just first half of the year to second half of the year, there's a lot that can change that you think is going to be consistent throughout the year. And it turns out to kind of be fool's gold in some ways. Here are the top 10 running backs in points per game from weeks 1 to 8. JT, CMC, Bijan, James Cook, Josh Jacobs, Jahmyr Gibbs, Devon Achane, Javonte, Bucky Irving, DeAndre Swift. The top 10 running backs in points per game from week 9 to 17. CMC, Gibbs, Bijan, Achane, Derrick Henry, Chase Brown, James Cook, Travis Etienne, JT, Travion Henderson. Okay, that's just the running back position. It gets even crazier when you look at wide receivers and tight ends. I mean, just wide receivers, some names that you guys will be aware of. Garrett Wilson was a top 10 wide receiver in points per game first half of the year. Roma Dunze was. Emeka Egbuka was. Michael Pittman Jr. was a top 12 receiver in points per game. Second half of the year, those guys were not even close. They were nowhere near the top 10, right? All of this is to say, teams change throughout the year. Tendencies change. That's just the NFL. That is the game that we play, the fake game that we play that is based off of the real NFL. Things change all the time. So to be able to find players like the Christian McCaffreys of the world, the Bijan Robinsons that can sustain success throughout the year is ultra, ultra rare. So if you get the sense that, man, the production is starting to drop off a little bit here towards the end of the first half of the year, it is not a bad idea to kind of hedge your bets to get some backup options in case things continue to go wrong. Or it's not that bad of an idea either, just to cut the losses and try to kind of take a chance on a second half of the year kind of bounce back for a guy like Chris Olave, some guys like that, where you're like, there's an opportunity to be had there for those guys.
There's, it seems crazy now at this point, right? And maybe not at this point, but at the start of the year, if you would have said, hey, mid-season, why don't you swap Emeka Egbuka for Chris Olave? You would have been like, huh? Emeka Egbuka's on fire right now. He's the best thing since sliced bread for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense. Mike Evans is out, and Chris Godwin's still dealing with injury, and look at what Egbuka has done over the back half of the season. Little to nothing. He's given you, I believe, 7 straight games of single-digit fantasy points, and he has actually probably sunk your team's chances going into the playoffs to winning a fantasy championship. So, yeah, you even look at Emeka Egbuka, who got after the season red hot. People were absolutely livid when people would say trade away Emeka Egbuka. Now, looking at week 8, like you said, Ty, you're selling Emeka Egbuka on his absolute peak. You're getting Chris Olave plus a small piece in return. All of a sudden, it was a phenomenal move to make. So knowing when to get out on players, also when to bet on players breaking out as well over the back half of the season. And I would even say just like never writing players off as well. Just to throw this in there, I know it wasn't a sustained success for Bill Krosky Merritt. He had his moments, right? But things happened where all of a sudden Chris Rodriguez is getting touches. That didn't stick around very long. I know Chris Rodriguez was banged up. I know he ended up getting sick, but there's always opportunity there for these other players. So I'm just always convinced to like never write a player off, but know the pickings of when to invest, when not to, when to cut your losses, like you said, or when to bet on a bounce back. Don't bet unless if it is truly a generational season from a Saquon Barkley. Don't bet on that just being the truth for the entire season. Even Jonathan Taylor, who we thought was going to have a similar season back in week 10, we're like, holy cow, who's going to stop him? All of a sudden, a Daniel Jones injury just derails the entire thing.
Right. And that's to say, too, like sometimes you're not able to predict those things. Sometimes they happen after your trade deadlines and you're just absolutely SOL, right? You can't do anything about that. But if you can see the end, you can see the light at the end of the tunnel in terms of the success and production that they're having. Don't listen to your buddies say, when they say that it's crazy to trade away that one player when you are seeing something different. Stick to your morals, stick to your guns, take the chance.
I'll keep us moving here. Our next 2 lessons actually go hand in hand. So I'll keep my bit short so you can come in and close the deal here. The only positional advantage that exists in fantasy football is Trey McBride. There's no other positional advantage at tight end, at quarterback. You could convince me Josh Allen is still a positional advantage when all things are said and done. But point being, Trey McBride this year was the tight end 1 in usage by over 4.5 expected points per game. Like, it was not even close. Brock Bowers was in second, but even he only had one more expected point than Jake Ferguson, who was the tight end 3. The other guys who follow in that list, I'll leave to you, Ty. But the point being is that the mid-round guys, Travis Kelce, Sam Laporta, TJ Hawkinson, and Mark Andrews just continue failing to return on investment year over year. I get the excitement of wanting to invest in those players, but honestly, it's the big 3 of McBride, Kittle, who I still think would be a phenomenal pick, Brock Bowers, who I still think has a ton of potential after we saw from his rookie season. It's either one of those three, or I have no interest until the late round tight end time.
The late round tight end continues to save the tight end position when you think all hope is lost because you didn't get one of the top 5 guys, right? Obviously, there are late round tight ends that don't pan out. That's not to say that every single late round tight end is going to work out for you. But like you said, these middle round tight ends just continue to sink your season. We talk about Sam Laporta. Yes, he got hurt, but he was only putting up 9.7 half PPR points per game before he got hurt. That's right in the mix with some of these late round tight ends like Hunter Henry, like Dalton Kincaid, like Jawan Johnson, like Dallas Goedert, like Kyle Pitts, right? When there is no advantage to be gained by spending a 6th or 7th round draft pick on a tight end, when you can get similar fantasy production, may look very different. The box score may look very different, but the fantasy points at the end of the day could be so similar. And you can get that in round 11 and round 12, or even like my favorite fullback in the NFL, Harold Fannin, who goes undrafted, right? You can get similar production later on. So yes, while you may look at some of those middle round tight ends and go, man, I really like those offenses. I really like the way that team is set up. Like they should have success. Have some patience. Wait until those later rounds. Worst case scenario, I thought about putting this in as a lesson, but this might just be more personal than it is for anybody to take advice in. Just stream the tight end position.
Just stream it. Yes.
Just stream it. Like you can find similar success by saving some draft picks and using it as another dart throw on another receiver or running back, depending on which round, because yes, there are dead zones and all that kind of stuff, but you get the point. Like the only tight end, right, in just this tight end discussion that is worth sinking that early capital into is Trey McBride. Everyone else is virtually the same. And I won't fall for the trap again of the, early 4th, 5th, 6th round draft picks when I know I can get the exact same 5 rounds later.
And I think I'm still, you just went like Trey McBride. And I think Trey McBride is probably going to be like a mid 2nd round pick where Brock Bowers was going this year. And I think that's totally fine because he should be right. He's drawing 160 freaking targets. Like he should be going there. He's drawing targets at the level of a Puka Nacua, right? But when you're trying to convince me that Sam Laporta is a good pick in the 4th round, when I could just have George Kittle instead, when you're trying to convince me that TJ Hawkinson, who admittedly I was in on because I thought he would be a great safety blanket for JJ McCarthy. Obviously, that went to absolute pot. I'm just looking at some of the other guys you could have had instead. Like looking at Sam Laporta, Devonta Smith was going in the same range. Jameson Williams, Patrick Mahomes, DeAndre Swift, all in this. George Pickens in the same range. TJ Hawkinson and Travis Kelce, they're going right around each other. But again, you've got Jalen Waddle, you got Chris Olave there. If you want to go down a little bit further, you got Rome Odunze for a few games. Mark Andrews, you got Travis Etienne who is going after him. Emeka Egbuka, if you want Emeka Egbuka for the first 8 games of the year. I mean, the amount of players you could be drafting instead of like trying to get a quote unquote leg up at the tight end position is just crazy in my mind when you could have stacked wide receiver and running back rooms and instead just stream the freaking position when you look at guys like Hunter Henry this year, who ended up being just fine. When you look at Theo Johnson, gave you a handful of good weeks. Jawan Johnson was an 18th round pick going undrafted in underdog best ball drafts this year. I ended up drafting a lot of Jawan Johnson for that very reason, right? So many different guys came on at different points during the season where it just kind of made your picks of Laporta, Hawkinson, Kelce, Andrews, that chunk of guys in the middle just look absolutely silly. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Underdog, where you can get into the game this season playing Pick'em. It's extremely simple. Just pick higher or lower on 2 or more of your favorite players. For example, I'll pick the higher on Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and Xavier Worthy. If I played $10 and got all 3 of them right, I would win $60 just by watching football. And that's the beauty of Pick'em. You can track your picks and your wins while you enjoy the game. Now, if you're not on Underdog yet, scan the QR code on your screen or use our code FELLAS when you sign up, because new customers will get $50 in bonus funds when you play your first $5 on the app. Plus, Underdog will give you a free pick to use in your first entry. Again, that's code FELLAS over on Underdog. Now let's get you back to the rest of the show. Let's keep it on Move It Tie. We're halfway through. We got 5 more lessons learned from this season, and I do think the last 2 maybe aren't necessarily lessons, but things to continue reiterating to yourself year over year. I know there were things that we talked about this offseason before we went into drafts. But lesson number 6, I'll start this section off here, Ty. I want to continue attacking running back ambiguity because every year there are 3+ backfields where the touches could be split in 5 different ways. Most often we find those running backs get pushed down the board, and you just look at Dallas as the primary example this year. Did we get a semi-lucky break with Miles Sanders ending up on IR? Sure, but even from week 1, we saw it was evident right away that Javonte Williams was going to be functioning as the 1A back for the Dallas Cowboys. But even if you want to consider backfields like Denver and Pittsburgh this year, we knew both J.K. Dobbins and R.J. Harvey were going to end up being involved. And Dobbins ended up being the better value until he wound up on IR. But then even at that, you got R.J. Harvey as a potential league winner for you down the stretch. We're talking about a guy who was averaging 18+ points per game in his last 3 games. Majority thought Caleb Johnson was going to be the dream Arthur Smith running back. Hi, me. I'm not afraid to fess up to that. I thought Caleb Johnson was going to be great under Arthur Smith. But then once you learned he couldn't return kickoffs, then it was Jaylen Warren who became a great value. And Kenny Gainwell came in from left field at the end of the season. Chuba Hubbard got the contract, but it was Rico Dowdle who gave you a more productive season. It's worth taking shots and swings and picking your spots on these kinds of backfields where touches are far from guaranteed, because more times than not, you are going to find a diamond in the rough.
Yeah, there are kind of 2 trains of thoughts when it comes to attacking ambiguity here at the running back spot. You look at it from a cost perspective, right? You look for the cheapest, maybe not the cheapest, but a cheaper option than the league guy. When we go through the offseason and we hear it, we're hearing training camp reports about it's kind of looking like it's not the guy that's being drafted way ahead of the other guys. And then you get into the whole discussion of like, well, you're betting on the second half of the year breakout and all that kind of stuff. Sure, whatever. We could have that discussion for hours.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
The other part of this though is that talent will win out. I just look at Jacksonville, right? We didn't know exactly what that backfield was going to look like. Some of us were on the Travis Etienne train. Some of us were on the Tank Bigsby train. I don't really think there were some people that were pretty big on the Bashal Tootin train because they're, again,
the upside swing.
They were on the upside swing.
Relatively undrafted.
Right. But at the end of the day, it usually comes down to those 2 things. It comes down to cost, and it usually comes down to talent. More times than not, talent will win out. And if it lines up with cost, then it's kind of like the double check marks, right? But from the cost perspective, when we're in drafts and all that kind of stuff, that's when we need to keep our ear to the ground for as long as possible to be like, hey, maybe sometimes the guy that's going first isn't exactly the guy that we need to be targeting right now. There could be value had later on in the year, but maybe we don't need to sink the capital in them right now where they clog up a roster spot. Maybe they're at the halfway point and they're a trade target to kind of hedge our bets against maybe some guys that can fall off as the year goes on.
And again, I even just want to again, for those in the big best ball tournaments that tune into our show, Ja'Cory Cross-Merritt is just another great example of, I get it. When you got the Brian Robinson trade, it was like, okay, well, Ja'Cory Cross-Merritt is going to shoot up boards, but like you still got Austin Eckler there, and you still probably going to get some Chris Rodriguez or Jeremy McNichols, right? But it was worth a dart throw because what if? And I understand Ja'Cory Cross-Merritt didn't necessarily get you to the fantasy playoffs, but come week 17 when he's giving you 22.5 points, week 15 when he was the RB10 against the Giants. I mean, it's just worth attacking the ambiguity in these backfields, even if it is a dart throw. The Bashal Tootin one didn't work out, but you know what? The Ja'Cory Cross-Merritt one did end up working out come end of season, just to provide one more example of a backfield where touches were ambiguous coming into the season. So continue to attack ambiguity, and maybe even to just kind of like add the spice on top too of like attack ambiguity on competent offenses, such as Denver, such as Dallas, because more times than not, you're going to find success from one of those running backs. We'll keep it moving though, Ty, because you want to talk about the mid-round wide receiver discrepancy where some of this running back ambiguity even like falls in. So we'll kind of stick in this area of the draft, except turn to wide receiver.
Yeah, there were 18 wide receivers taken between rounds 4 and 6 this year, right? In round 4, Marvin Harrison Jr., Mike Evans, Terry McLaurin, Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams, and DK Metcalf. Round 5, Cortland Sutton, DJ Moore, Devontae Smith, Xavier Worthy, Tataroa McMillan, George Pickens. Then in round 6, you had Zay Flowers, you had Jamison Williams, you had Calvin Ridley, Jalen Waddle, Travis Hunter, and Rashee Rice. You can probably figure out who did well this year and who did not. But here's the stat that I found super, super interesting. Exactly 9 of these 18 receivers finished inside the top 24 in points per game. The other 9 finished outside the top 30. Okay. That is a huge gap for similar prices that we're drafting these guys at. So if you choose the right ones, you're set up really nicely. If you walked away with Devontae Adams, George Pickens, Jameson Williams, second half of the year, you had to wait for that one, but like you waited out on Rashee Rice, like you got those 3, you kind of set yourself up for some success. But if you choose the wrong ones, regardless if they were injured or not, like you chose Terry McLaurin or Marvin Harrison Jr., you took DJ Moore or Xavier Worthy, you took Calvin Ridley or Travis Hunter for as long as it took, and then he got hurt. It kind of sunk your team here, right? So we talked about all offseason. In the middle rounds is where you really make your team, right? You don't win the draft in the beginning. You can help your team out by drafting well in the end, but it's usually those middle rounds that separate the really solid teams from the really great teams and from the contending teams. This wide receiver discrepancy is important to know because if we see the running back ADPs climb up the board a bit next year, which I'm assuming that it will because of how they performed this year.
I assume we will. Yeah.
It's going to make drafting wide receivers that much more important and that much more difficult then because you need to hit on the receivers end. So I just found that interesting to find that much of a gap between these middle round receivers when we thought, you know what, if we stack them on running backs early, then we take as many shots on receivers. It's kind of a 50-50 shot here in the middle.
And I think the other takeaway you pull out of that too, just as I was listening to the players that you were naming off and taking a look myself, just consider the offenses that these players are on. Compare Marvin Harrison Jr. and the Arizona Cardinals' dysfunctional offense this year to the thriving Los Angeles Rams offense with Devontae Adams, who we said at the start of the year was going to get a crap ton of red zone work. What happened? Devontae Adams was a top 10 wide receiver this year. Marvin Harrison Jr., again, another disappointing sophomore year. DJ Moore versus Cortland Sutton and DK Metcalf. Fair to say that, DJ Moore was more of a, would you rather take the bet on DJ Moore or Rome Odunze? And we all were in favor of, you and I were more in favor of Rome Odunze than Cameron, our co-host, was. But think about it. Cortland Sutton and DK Metcalf. We all knew Denver's offense was probably going to be better than the Pittsburgh Steelers offense this year. Tenero McMillan or Devonta Smith. We probably knew, hey, Tenero McMillan turned in a fine season, but Devonta Smith gave you a lot more spike weeks. Philadelphia Eagles are just a flat-out better offense. The Xavier Worthy one, you have Rashee Rice there. But again, you're looking at Rashee Rice or Zay Flowers. Who's the better passing offense? I'm going to say the one that has Patrick Mahomes, even though Lamar Jackson turned in an MVP season last year, right? So many different ways. You just look at it and say, who's the better passing offense? George Pickens, as the other example, right? He was the easiest one to take in that range because you knew this could be the Cincinnati Bengals of 2025. So when you're trying to separate these wide receivers, I don't know, man. Going forward, the tiebreaker for me is no longer just going to be, well, he could just PPR his way to a top 15 finish, unless if your name is Garrett Wilson. That did not happen for you to any extent this year.
You could honestly look at also a lot of these middle rounds is where you're going to get these really good teams, wide receiver 2, in these kind of mediocre to bad teams. Yes, these mediocre to bad teams, wide receiver 1, DJ Moore, Calvin Ridley, right?
Oh, Ridley's the other one. Yes. Ridley or Pickens. That was a conversation at one point.
That was a conversation at one point. But like you said, the tiebreaker from here on out should be who's going to be the best, who's going to be the better passing offense. Because yes, there's the argument for volume as the wide receiver 1 compared to a wide receiver 2. Fully understand that. But give me the best offenses, because I don't want to spoil a lesson that we're going to talk about here, but like, you want the best. So draft the best. Don't try to get cute with it.
No, and we'll get to that, because there's the last two again. Like I said, there's definitely room. There's definitely room for them to just be reminders more than lessons learned. Let's say. I'll keep us moving to lesson number 8, though. I want to remind us to draft rookies with intention, and I say intention because this year reminded us what you're really signing up for when you're drafting rookies. I think we were spoiled by the lot of rookie wide receivers from last year in 2024, which all made us bullish on the talent in this 2025 class. Drafting Ashton Genty in the first round definitely gave you an adrenaline rush, but I do feel like it was done without the intention of recognizing the incredibly low ceiling of this Las Vegas Raiders offense. I don't think Tet was necessarily being drafted incorrectly this year, but his ceiling was limited with Carolina and Bryce Young as his quarterback. Travis Hunter. Look, I said I would rather be wrong trying to be right about Travis Hunter being good. I believe in not drafting scared, but injury is different than learning how to play both sides of the ball in the NFL. Probably should have put more weight into that than I initially did. Travion Henderson, maybe a hot take. I still don't think he was an outright bad pick in fantasy football drafts this year, given his second half of the season where he gave you 3 games of 25 plus points. You knew it was going to be the case that you had to wait on him, similar to Jahmyr Gibbs, but maybe we should have given Ramondre Stevenson a bit more credit with Josh McDaniels coming back into town. I could keep going. I'll even throw out Cam Scatterby, right? Hey, ambiguous backfield in New York. What if with Cam Scatterby? Because it's not like Tyrone Tracy was overly special last season, right? So you can draft with the intention of, well, Cam Scatterby could end up being the guy. Wouldn't you know, he turned in a top 12 performance in points per game this year. I'm not saying you shouldn't take swings on these running backs. Again, I just said with Cam Scatterby, but we really need to take into account every dynamic at hand with rookies with almost equal gravity. The good almost has to be just as relevant as the bad in these scenarios. And we can't just say, well, talent wins out, because they still have a lot to adjust to in their rookie season.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times too, when we look at rookies, you're drafting rookies for the second half of the year, which sometimes they deliver, sometimes they don't. But that has to factor into your drafting equation as well, yes. Because if they're not exactly going to produce right away, you're going to have to wait a while. And so then do you cut your losses at some point during the year to, sometimes you got to get desperate, right? The record isn't where you want it to be or where it should be. And so you got to make some moves. All of those things kind of play into the discussion of like, hey, when you're looking at a rookie in your draft, you have to know exactly, one, what you're getting, and two, what exactly the timeline is here. Because we go back to Ashton Genty, like we knew he was going to be the guy right away, but we just kind of overlooked, like you said, we overlooked the fact that this Raiders offense's like overall ceiling was not as high as all the other teams, but somehow we convinced ourselves that he can make it work or that he could be the anomaly here. That's a tough bet to make when it's round 1. It's a little more understandable when it's a Cam Scatterby in round 8 or 9 or wherever you went, which is substantially later, right? All of these things. Drafting with intentionality, drafting with a kind of a vision for what you think the season will go. If you just blindly draft a rookie because, well, they were drafted high in the league or they had a historical season in college, and without putting any thought into what could be ahead of them in the NFL, is kind of negligent in my eyes.
And I get we want to be excited about rookies and the talent that they have, the opportunities that they have. We would rather be early on these players, especially if you're getting them at values. Matthew Golden, a primary example. I was willing to be excited on Matthew Golden, and that was an utter and complete fail. I get it. But again, we almost have to go back to the good has to equal the bad. The bad has to equal the good at the same time, and just let them neutralize one another and instead start to acknowledge situation rather than just purely they're rookies, they're young, they're talented, let them thrive in their schemes. Not everybody can be Saquon Barkley in his rookie season. Not everybody can be Jamar Chase in their rookie season. I know we started to get more of the outliers like that last season. That's why we were so excited on the sophomore class. That's why we were bullish on the rookie class this year with all the talented running backs. Not always how it works out, though. Not always how it works out. The good has to come with the bad. The bad has to come with the good as well. So let them kind of neutralize one another and draft with intention, recognizing it's going to take some time for all of these players. Before we get into the quick last 2 tips, Ty, I just want to remind the people that we are still with you for the entire offseason. We are not going anywhere. We are bringing you Dynasty rankings next week. We're getting to some Dynasty trade targets as well. So much Dynasty and NFL draft content coming for you all this offseason. So make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell as well, so you know when all of our newest content is out, because we ain't going nowhere. We value you all. We love you all. We want to help you win not just your redraft leagues, not just your best ball leagues, but your dynasty leagues as well, while talking what you need to know for rookies coming up in the 2026 NFL season. Last two lessons here, Ty. And again, maybe more so reminders than lessons. I said it earlier. I didn't want to draft scared with Travis Hunter. It didn't work out. We told people not to draft scared with Christian McCaffrey. And what does he do? Turn in the RB1 this year.
Turn in the RB1. I mean, we try to simplify it as much as possible. Or we try to explain it so many different ways about, hey, when the upside is the top overall player in fantasy football, it's worth the risk, all those different kinds of things, right? And honestly, like when I look ahead to what your next reminder is, these last two kind of work together, and it's kind of a similar train of thought when we're talking about like the George Pickens versus Zay Flowers or the George Pickens versus Calvin Ridley debates, right? Bad wide receiver ones, really good wide receiver twos. And it's kind of counter thought, or it's at least kind of backwards thinking to go, why would I want a wide receiver two instead of a wide receiver one? Don't draft scared, right? Trying to predict injuries, trying to predict, hey, wide receiver ones will always outproduce wide receiver twos. Doesn't really work out all the time. Sometimes it's true, but it's not it's not a guarantee. It's not a surefire practice either. So when it comes to CMC, you knew that we had to bring him up because we were on that mountain all year long, right? So not to say that we told you so, but we told you so.
Wow.
When it comes,
it was either you or Cameron who got crucified for saying you would take CMC RB number one overall, and people were like, "You're absolutely insane to sign up for that." And
knees.
I thought it was a little bit crazy because I thought, again, I was trying to make sure the bad had its role next to the good, but never did I once deny that CMC could absolutely smash as the RB1 overall, and it was a mistake to draft him as late as he was going.
I'm just saying, fortune favors the bold. Okay. Just saying.
But here, let's just get to the last one then. Draft good players on good teams. Hello, Christian McCaffrey is a good player on a good team. Draft him. I get that's the case for most players in the first round. But you know what? You drafted Justin Jefferson, and the Minnesota Vikings were a subpar team. I don't think they're as good as their record indicates.
Their defense is
their defense is exceptional. Their offense is subpar, right? So you got punished for that a bit this year. Amon-Ra St. Brown, a great player on a good team. Jamar Chase, a great player on a good team. Let's see. I want to get to a few other players that weren't first-round picks. Let's see here. You could even say JSN, good player that ended up being on a good team this year. Travis Etienne, a good player on a Jacksonville team that ended up being good. People had questions about James Cook's sustainability. Draft James Cook. He's a good player on a really good Buffalo Bills team. Kyron Williams, hey, you know what? Turns out he's a good football player, and the Rams are a good football team. Maybe we shouldn't have had as many questions as we initially did.
Josh Jacobs,
good player on a good team, right? I understand we're talking about a lot of early players, but even as you get further down to drafts, it just becomes best practice. George Pickens, a good player on a good Dallas Cowboys team. It just becomes best practice to just rely on those guys instead of taking a Breece Hall on a terrible Jets team. Breece Hall is a great football player. Terrible Jets team. Ashton Genty, great football player. Terrible Raiders offensive line. Terrible Raiders team. It's as simple as that. Draft good players on good teams. You're going to find more success than that.
I can't say it any better than that. That's kind of the pillar of this show. We draft good players on good teams. We don't draft scared. And fortune favors the bold, which we are, and good things usually happen.
I get it's not everybody's cup of tea. If you want to win fantasy football, though, you do have to play with some risk sometimes. You can't always
have to.
You can't play for floor in fantasy football because drafting for ceiling wins fantasy football championships. Literally, good people over at the Underdog Football Show, Josh Norris and Ron, he always brings on Ron Stewart every year. They do an entire episode about how drafting for ceiling literally wins you fantasy football championships. And it's true. It's 100% true. So draft good players on good teams and don't draft scared. We appreciate you all. We'll be back later this week. For those of you still playing in week 18, we got you. We'll cover you with 12, 18 players, depending on if our co-host is actually back from Florida in time. You know, no big deal. It's just snowing like crazy in Minnesota and you can't fly home. Isn't that convenient? Cameron has to sit out another episode or two. Oh man, he couldn't have asked for a better time to not be on our show. At any rate, we'll be back later this week for those of you playing in week 18. If you want to follow our other socials as well, FFL is over on Twitter, the FFL is on Instagram, Fantasy Football Fellas, Facebook, and TikTok. If you're a YouTube person through and through, respect, salute. We got you covered still. Fantasy Football Fellas shorts. I am at Lucas Wenzel on X, Tyler_Plath for Ty. We'll see you all on Thursday. 12 to 18 different players, whether you should start or sit them in week 18. Deuces.
Deuces.